I think on Russia there are question marks. You mentioned the visit or the meeting with the Iranian official, and there are different narratives for that. One is portraying Russian backing to Iran, but the other one is maybe constraining. Part of the lack of success is the unwillingness of our current coalition, which is a far-right coalition led by Netanyahu, who opposes the two-state solution, to find a model of who will replace Hamas. If you want Hamas gone from Gaza, who comes in? There are two things happening. On one hand, you have a war going on with so many fronts, escalating tensions. And on the other, you have an Israeli society that's currently remembering and mourning and processing the 1 year mark to the deadliest day in Israel history.
Hello and welcome. I'm Nagin Singh and this is Oneindia. And today, of course, it's October 7 and we are discussing what's happening in Middle East. Now we have our guest. He's a senior fellow. He's an expert on the international matters, especially in the area of Israel, Iran, Jordan, all these places which are almost on fire. Every day we know that what is happening in Haifa, what is happening in Beirut. There are attacks. And now, Mr. Goren, welcome to the show. And the first question straight away, what is the situation in Middle East? You are in Jordan right now. What is the situation? What are the news which are coming in? And this is October 7. What can we expect that is going to happen?
It is a pleasure being here. Thank you. And greetings from Jerusalem. There are two things happening. On one hand, you have a war going on with so many fronts, escalating tensions. And on the other, you have an Israeli society that's currently remembering and mourning and processing the 1 year mark to the deadliest day in Israel history. So it's kind of remembering and reflecting on an event that never ended. October 7th of last year is still very much present in the lives and memories of Israelis as we speak now. So many people are still processing their losses, hostages that are still held by Hamas in Gaza, people who are displaced from their home, people who are fighting across the borders. So it's still very much in existence. And while that is happening, and we're trying to make sense of all that happened and what are the domestic consequences on our society, on our political system, on our identity, there are soldiers that are fighting, on the northern border against Hezbollah in Lebanon, against Hamas in Gaza, confronting threats from Iran, from Iraq, from Yemen, a new reality, I think, for Israel that we didn't know a year ago.
But Mr. Goren, do you think it is not just war between countries? This is more a war between the Jews and between the Muslims.
I think not, because you see so many Arab countries that have agreements with Israel, that signed peace treaties, whether it's Egypt and Jordan, or countries that have normalization agreement with Israel, like the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco. And these relationships are still intact. So basically the battle that is happening is between us and those on the extremist side of the other side. Hamas, Hezbollah, these are terror organizations. These are not mainstream Muslim. And I think much of the Arab countries in the Muslim world is supporting a two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians and is willing to have good relation with Israel. If that happens, there is a lot of criticism, of course, against Israeli actions in Gaza within the Arab and Muslim world. There are those that do not want peace. Also, in the extreme part of the Israeli society, we have those. So it's kind of a battle between those who want a future of peace, of prosperity, of security, of stability, and those who want to see eternal fighting, basically, between the people.
But this seems to be unending war. 1 year, and it has only spread across countries. Now, Lebanese are saying that it is almost like Gaza-like situation in Beirut or other parts of Lebanon, especially, of course, the southern Lebanon. So how do you see Israel retaliating to the attacks? And what should we expect today after October 1st attack, Operation True Promise 2? What should we expect from Israel? Are they going to hit the nukes, the nuclear stores, or they are going to restrain as, UK and France, the US, UK and France, they are saying that, okay, you should control these attacks, don't attack on the nuclear sites of Iran. And of course, we have seen what happened yesterday and day before yesterday when it was almost like Netanyahu versus the French Macron. So where do you see all this happening, and what will be Israel's reaction?
So you rightly mentioned the conflict between Israel and Iran, which used to be through proxies. Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis are all proxies of Iran. And traditionally, the warfare between Israel and Iran was not direct, was not public. And what happened and what changed in April of this year when Iran attacked Israel for the first time with missiles, it became very direct. And just a few days ago, we had almost 200 Iranian missiles going towards Israel. And now there is this discussion about Israeli retaliation on that. Of course, we do not know when it will happen, in which scope. The Prime Minister has already vouched to do that, and it makes sense in terms of Israel's strategy. But what kind of action and for what strategic goal? What is the objective of it all? And I think on that, there is coordination between Israel and the US administration. And you mentioned all those international actors that want to see more constraint. I think Israel listens mostly to Washington from the other actors in the international community. And the goal of President Biden from October 7th of last year was first to stand by Israel and ensure its security, but also prevent the escalation to turn into a full-fledged regional war. And I think that American goal is still very much in place. And Israel will probably take into account the American concern when it decides what to do in Iran. The Israeli Minister of Defense is going to Washington this week. So I guess that will shape what is happening. But that's quite separate from what happens between Israel and Hezbollah, because there Israel sees an opportunity to basically dismantle or dramatically weaken the most significant enemy it has on its immediate border. The successes of the last 2-3 weeks is something that Israel wants to continue vis-a-vis Hezbollah and step it up to ensure a different reality across the border.
There is another big factor, Mr. Goren, that is Russia. We had the news that Israel attacked the Russian bases, air bases in Syria, and it was a big news. But now, will Russia enter this war? What do you think will be Russian perspective? They are already fighting with Ukraine, and they have made several comments. Russian PM was in Iran just the day before the strike of October 1st. So where do you see Russia in this war, and will they ever, enter this directly, or will they continue to just support Iran from the back end?
I think what we should aspire is for less and less countries to be militarily involved and more countries engage in diplomacy that could help reach agreements and find a way out. And I think on Russia, there are question marks. You mentioned the visit or the meeting with the Iranian official, and there are different narratives for that. One is portraying Russian backing to Iran, but the other one is maybe constraining, because I'm not sure that the Russians want this full escalation as well. So over the last years, Israel and Russia, although they have differences between them, managed to create this modus vivendi in terms of Israeli attacks against Iranian targets in Syria, because Israel, it's not started last year that Israel was acting to prevent Iran from entering or getting a stronghold within Syria, where Russia is also dominant. So I think all these operations that Israel took place in the region were somehow within, again, the red lines, the arrangements, the consideration that were agreed upon with Russia. And Russia is an important actor. I don't see it having an appetite to enter the war. Israel definitely needs to take into account, where it attacks. And I don't think it attacked specifically Russian places, but maybe in the vicinity or nearby. And I hope that we won't have more countries joining in. That's not where we want to do.
Right. And how about Israel? Israel, when the attack happened, when Hamas attacked on October 7th, after that, the first comment, or the most famous comment of Benjamin Netanyahu, was that they will finish Hamas. How much have they succeeded? Because it's a big question. This is what the war is continuing, that Israel wants to finish Hamas. But I think they haven't finished it yet. It still exists. More than 40,000 people have been killed in Gaza, and it continues. So where does it end? When Hamas will be beaten?
First, it's true, the human suffering of civilians on both sides of the conflict is mounting, and I think it's a consideration for those dealing with military and diplomacy to take into account people on the ground and what they are going through, and how to really find a way out of that. If you speak about the Israeli goals, so yes, there was this very fierce messaging about Hamas, but then when it was translated into objectives approved by the Israeli coalition, basically there were three. So it was about making sure Hamas is not governing anymore in Gaza. making sure that Hamas cannot pose another threat like it did on October 7th to
But
Israel,
but
still
Netanyahu didn't
releasing.
succeed in beating Hamas. Hamas exists.
Yeah, so I think that was kind of a very fine tuning of the messaging, that it was clear quite from early on that you cannot eliminate an organization or an idea or an ideology, okay? You want to make sure that Hamas is not a political power governing Gaza, or that Hamas is not having the military or terror capabilities to go against Israel, and to make sure that all these hostages, 101 hostages are still held by Hamas, are released. It was 250 a year ago. And I think Israel on all three of them has only partial success, still 100 hostages still held, Hamas, still present, still fighting, although it's much weaker than it was a year ago dramatically. But part of the lack of success is the unwillingness of our current coalition, which is a far-right coalition led by Netanyahu, who opposes the two-state solution, to find a model of who will replace Hamas. If you want Hamas gone from Gaza, who comes in?
Yeah.
It shouldn't be Israel. It should be the Palestinian leadership, the moderate leadership from Ramallah, from the Palestinian Authority, in some renewed fashion, taking control over the Gaza Strip, like was the situation before Hamas took over Gaza from the Palestinian Authority itself. Then you need international and regional actors to pitch in and to help rebuild and reconstruct and pave a way towards peacemaking. But if Netanyahu and the government does not want all of that, then basically, we are stuck with Hamas, which is the position that we had before the war, where the Israeli Prime Minister was basically enabling Hamas to continue to be in power. And the question here is, how much has really changed, a year into the war, in the terms of the policies and the priorities of the current Israeli Prime Minister.
And the biggest question, when do you think the war will end? Or will it ever end? Or it is going to continue for another couple of years until all the resources are, destroyed in all countries?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think looking at it from an Israeli perspective, I think that part of it depends on political change in Israel, because it's not only about the war ending, but which reality we want to see after the war ends. And if we want to see a pathway to peace, to more normalization of relations with the Arab countries, to more regional integration and cooperation, then we need an Israeli leadership that is not led by extremists, but by people who are more moderate, more open to engaging with the other side, to looking for peaceful solution, to working with the international community. And I think the current coalition is not there in Israel. And after we have the next elections, I hope we will have a more reasonable coalition that could advance that. But of course, some of the problems are on security, and you need to weaken those spoilers in the region together with allies, because other Arab countries and international actors have the same basically goal of Israel. They maybe not share the military way of conduct that Israel is doing, but you need the regional international community to pitch in and help what they can to create these new regional realities, while we are working domestically to change the nature of our governance.
But Mr. Goren, do you think Netanyahu has failed as a PM of Israel, or he has failed the people of Israel? We have already lost 150 hostages. There have been multiple protests, and that too, quite massive protests that Israel has seen. So do you think he has failed as a PM?
I think so, and I think beyond that, I think you see it in consecutive public opinion polls in Israel that most of the society holds Netanyahu accountable for the failure of October 7, the policies that he had before, the conduct that he did later on since the war began, and they want early elections. So it's kind of a popular mindset in Israel. So while Israel is united on the war issues and a lot of solidarity and mutual support, there is also a demand for political change. And that's definitely there. So I think there's a consideration of leadership failures, mostly because the very basic concept of, if a prime minister, whoever that was in a position of power when the worst day in Israeli history happened, the most natural thing to do is to give a chance for someone else to repair, or at least take responsibility for what your role was. And I think Netanyahu until now did not take responsibility, did not enable an inquiry committee to really investigate into why everything happened, what lessons should be drawn. And I think that's a sign that most Israelis want to see differently.
And my last question, Mr. Goen, uh, we heard multiple news reports, of course, some were Iranian news services, that Iron Dome failed multiple times, and it crumbled under several attacks by Hezbollah and by Iran, of course. But can you tell us what is the situation? How safe are Israelis? This is my last question. How safe are Israelis right now? Has Iron Dome Iron Dome crumbled, or is it still working the way it was? Or what is happening about the shield that is protecting millions of Israelis?
Not being a security expert myself, I can give this testimony as an Israeli on the ground, and the
Right.
sense of security that the Iron Dome and the Arrow rockets, Arrow 2 and Arrow 3, are providing Israelis. So we are feeling less safe because we are under fire. There are sirens going on from Haifa to Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. People are running to shelters every now and then. But when this is happening, the scope of people who have been injured or killed is relatively very low. Okay, we saw 200 missiles almost go towards Israel, and not a single Israeli died of that, and that's not happening by chance. So it's true that the more rockets that are being fired at the same time, it's more difficult to confront it. The system enables those rockets that are not going towards population centers perhaps to make impact. But overall, I think the sense that we are protected and that such a long war, the major impact that was done was not by missiles. Okay, that's not where most Israelis were killed or injured over the last year, almost at all. We hope it will continue, but I don't think that Iron Dome crumbled. I think, on the contrary, it provides Israel with a strategic asset that enables at least some security for people in a very unsafe time that we are living through.
Well, Mr. Goren, we'll just hope that this war ends. That will be good, of course, for Israel, Palestine, Iran, Lebanon, and all the neighboring countries. We hope there is end to the war in Russia as well. But it's not us who will be deciding. We can just give the insights that what is happening, and
Thank
let's
you
hope
very much.
things move in a better way. This was Nimrod Goren giving us all the details about what is happening in this ongoing war. And we'll get back to you with some more news about Israel, Hamas, Iran, Lebanon war. This is Nagin Singh for
Thank
One
you.
India.
Don't miss out. Log on to oneindia.com for more updates.